What is up, everyone? I am Maya May. Welcome back to Punching Up. Wow, so much has happened in the last couple of weeks, and right now everyone is Epstein files this and Epstein files that, except for Donald Trump, who's like the Epstein files total hoax. But I also want not distract from the fact that billions of dollars have just gone to ICE, to law enforcement, while money has been taken away from the very things that make America America, our education system. Things are being cut left and right. And so, since so much money is going to law enforcement, I thought it was important to talk to somebody who has worked in law enforcement, but not as a law enforcement officer per se, as a psychologist, because I need to know what the they are thinking. This is what I need to know, y'all. And so my guest tonight is a good friend of mine, Dr. Matthew Schumacher. I'm going to bring him on. Hello.
Hello.
Can I call you Matt on air? Can I do that?
That's allowed.
All right.
It's preferred, actually.
Excellent. Matt, you are a national security psychologist, clinical psychologist, all sorts of. You were in the Navy, lieutenant in the Navy, lieutenant commander.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Lieutenant commander in the Navy. You were formerly with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, teacher, researcher, practitioner. Can you talk a little bit about your background and even just how you decided to go into psychology with law enforcement? Because that to me is awesome.
Well, it's actually interesting because I grew up in Chicago and graduated from the University of Chicago with a couple degrees and got my first job at Stanford and was doing bipolar research when 9/11 happened. So I kind of already knew by then in my early 20s that I wanted to be a psychologist. But that was obviously life-changing for many of us. Both of my grandfathers served in the Navy in World War II. So over the course of getting my PhD, I studied military suicide. And then when it was time to get an internship and a job, I joined the Navy. I thought I'd do like 3 years in San Diego and like be hanging out in La Jolla or, working at UCSD or the VA. And it turned into a decade and 4 deployments. Postdoc training in national security psychology. It was the first really of its kind. And then I finished my career with MARSOC in 2018.
Can you translate that for us?
Oh, yes. MARSOC is Marine Special Operations Command.
Got it. Okay.
So it's really like the SOF community, Green Berets, SEALs, Marine Raiders, and then the Air Force. They've got a whole bunch of people too, PJs and all sorts of special tactics officers. So that SOCOM community. But I was really interested in settling down and slowing things down. And I wanted to come apply some of that training to law enforcement in Los Angeles. The county of LA is bigger than Israel, right? Altogether. So it had quite a bit of intelligence and, counterterrorism stuff going on here. And, I moved right into COVID and right into the sort of riots, protests, and the sort of rolling, protests and unrest that occurred throughout that period. Obviously COVID was medically very interesting for our first responders as well. I was one of them, I suppose. And then all the way into Trump 2.0 and that transition. The first thing I did not respond to with my brothers and sisters in the sheriff's department was the fires in Malibu. I was actually done by then.
So for all of the training that you've had in crisis management, in deploying in a situation where split-second decisions are critical, did you think, because I think you said you did 2 tours, you did?
4
tours. Did you ever think that those kind of crises would be happening here on as regular a basis?
No. I mean, we all remember the beginning of COVID, right? Which was like, oh my God, it's going to be like a domestic war zone, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, well, I know what this is like. A lockdown was just like a deployment, right? So that part was okay. But yeah, it just keeps happening, right? There's always these, maybe not as big as George Floyd, and that kind of stuff. Yeah. Maybe not as big because people have stuff to do now. They're not locked down now. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's been pretty regular. And LA, especially downtown LA, where I actually ended up living. But before I moved to Malibu, it's actually the stage, right? It's actually like built like a stage. And so a lot of things happen there that are, a bit choreographed and, it makes for a nice little stage for all parties, right?
So so speaking of stages, like when you're on, what is your day-to-day look like previously, like when there's a crisis?
Sure.
event? What happened?
So, when I was in the sheriff's department, I worked out of the intelligence unit and did some liaison with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. That also meant the sheriff's got a unit called SRT, the Sheriff's Response Team, and those are the people that are kind of Johnny on the spot to back up LAPD or, whoever's in basically having a riot or protest or something's getting a little bit out of hand. But it could also be like, we had an accident where a gentleman ran the wrong way into a cadet class. We can respond to that. So basically, you're sort of sitting around hanging out, probably looking at the intelligence and working on cases. And then if something happens, I could go one of two ways. One way is, hey, these deputies and first responders need an on-site person to provide some support and just to kind of show that we care and check on them. Basically, we call that being forward, available, and present. And then otherwise, if it's like a real emergency, it could be anything that's from we responded to the when Charles Drew had hate threats. Remember that HBCU issue?
Okay.
I think Charles Drew got involved in that. I don't know if we necessarily call Charles Drew an HBCU, but the idiot that was Googling HBCUs to send threats to thought it was. So those kinds of things, right? So the crisis and trying to be on that X is generally sort of the job. De-escalate. I don't have a gun. I don't have, any of those things. So it's about understanding that I don't mind not having those things. And
I'm glad that you said de-escalate because I briefly went out to Paramount after the situation had gone down at the Home Depot where there was quite a bit of chaos. By the time I got there, the chaos had quieted down, but it didn't look like the officers were necessarily trained in de-escalation. They were approaching us in a way, and we were mostly journalists, content creators at that point, and very aggressively pushing us back, get back, get back, get back. Can you talk about what de-escalation looks like in a scenario like what's happening right now where maybe there are people who aren't as trained as other people?
Right. Well, first and foremost, just to be clear on how all of this works, right? Usually most protests are scheduled in advance and they're coordinated with law enforcement, and everybody's job altogether is to make this safe and sound. So it's usually the trouble happens for one of two reasons. The first is that it's more spontaneous, right? So it's like not the police aren't there, they're not ready, they're caught a bit off guard, and they have to sort of scramble to get there. If you can remember, LAPD Chief McDonnell was saying when there was criticism about how long it took LAPD to get to respond to the basically the request for services, officer needs assistance for ICE, it was like, well, I can't just send cars, right? I have to send a full team of so many people. So time is usually of the essence for de-escalation. You actually have to get there before it's escalated. Right? If it's already escalated, or if it's not a situation that's under control, de-escalation is hard. Okay. The other thing, and I think we've all seen this over the years, right? That there are, we're a diverse place here, and lots of people have lots of different, axes to grind and positions to take, and there's often one or two in there somewhere that may escalate it to the point where the police say unlawful assembly. Once they do unlawful assembly, you're getting moved out. Right. And so the sheriff's department in particular is pretty clear on that. That's probably what they were doing at that point. Once they declare an unlawful assembly, they're probably going to just move you out. And it's less concern about, de-escalation, and it's more a concern about restoring law and order and, just totally mitigating whatever risk that was, is what I would say. Not to say that that's pleasant to be on the receiving end of. It's not.
It wasn't.
the one thing that I think people struggle with, and it's very understandable, right, is that there's really no such thing as like a pretty or nice police takedown. When you get arrested, it doesn't usually go well. You know what I mean? Like we see a lot of the bad stuff, and I've got lots to say about deputies and officers being stressed, overworked, you know what I mean, and being too much asked of them, or doing things that maybe they don't have the proper training and side-by-side support with. But we ask a lot of them, you know what I mean? And I think that it's really important to understand that if you're going to do these kinds of protests, it's really helpful to, coordinate ahead of time. And once you're there and doing that, then listen to the instructions. But it's a mess, right? Like nobody else is signing up for that job.
And I was curious about, because much of what I know about all of this is from watching procedurals. Like I'm watching Blind Spot right now. There's the psychologist talking to them, who ends up, I don't want to, no spoiler alerts, but the show is like apparently very old. I just now hip to it. But this mindset, if you're they don't know necessarily that they're going to end up in chaotic scenes like this. And I'm particularly thinking now of downtown LA because there were, it seemed like thousands. It looked like there were thousands of officers deployed. When they woke up in the morning, were they thinking that was what their day was going to look like?
Well, not on day one, for sure, right? I mean, they may have had a little bit of information. Again, we call that intelligence, right? Especially when it came around to the No Kings Day, that stuff was planned in advance. Everyone knew it was going to happen. But if you ever noticed in LA, things sort of start to happen usually somewhere around City Hall or maybe in the, in the music center area. I mean, that's all kind of set up as a public or civic square. And then you'll see the people start headed towards the freeway. The 101 is that away, right? Okay, so just to make something, just to put real meat on the bones of this, right? So that area is joint LAPD and LA Sheriff's Department territory because there are county buildings, which the Sheriff's Department's responsible for, and then there's local city buildings and then there's actually also U.S. Marshals who are responsible for the federal courts and the federal buildings. Okay, and that one that they stood by downtown with lots of Marines in front of it, that's a Marshal's handle, right? Because it's a federal building. So they all start moving towards the 101. And I'm not going to say anybody's pushing them towards the 101. Once they get on the 101, whose jurisdiction is it?
I don't know. This is a quiz that I'm going to fail.
CHP.
Okay.
Right?
Oh,
So if
like
let's
this,
just say,
like the show.
if let's just say the LAPD lets them get to that part and doesn't stop them, maybe by trying to use de-escalation, you know what I mean? Or maybe because it's more spontaneous and no one knows, but they always end up on the freeway. And then of course the poor chippies get a ton of stuff thrown at them and everything. And then it's this weird thing we have in LA where there's LAPD, LASD, there's the chippies on the state side, and then any of the federal folks that have to be involved because there's all those things right there downtown.
So again, like this is where it's like, this is my jurisdiction. I'm curious when you have all of these different agencies coming together, because if it's about keeping the community safe and keeping property safe, if you have all of these different agencies coming together, how does the communication happen, especially in escalating or rapidly escalating situations?
Sure. Well, I mean, some of this gets a little bit specific because it depends on, so again, let's say it's a small thing that starts in LAPD territory primarily. There's usually good communications between the LAPD and the Sheriff's Department, but somebody has to request mutual aid, right? Like, so once the mutual aid request is done, there's actually, the county has a joint command center, and then all those people kind of get together and each agency has its, I think the communications go relatively well there. The problem is that doesn't help, little Joe Schmuckatelli who's in the front of a line watching someone like maybe wind up and throw a rock versus a nothing, and they're trying to decide if they need to use a less than lethal round, or they're trying to decide. So that almost all of it really comes down to that one or handful of officers or deputies that are there on the front line trying to make a split-second decision, like almost everything else we ask them to do, right? So
and are they working overtime at this point where they're not
probably,
sleeping well, maybe, or not? Like,
yeah,
how do you
yep.
sleep? Okay, so you were in war zones.
Mm-hmm.
And downtown LA, in many ways, the way people were being circled, the way troops, I say troops, and I almost caught myself, but they actually were
like troops. Yeah, and then they were troops. Yep,
and they were troops. Seeing the way they moved, it felt to me as a civilian, I was like, oh, this is what a war zone must feel like. From a psychological perspective, can you talk about what is going on in their heads?
sure.
And are they thinking about the fact that they're trained for this a little bit in some ways, but the people who are out there, a lot of it is just like moms and dads who are like, hey,
Sure.
we don't want
Sure.
ice.
Well, we could spend an entire show talking about the intricacies of policy, about what kind of rubber bullet, what kind of warning, how much time, how much space. That's complicated, right? And so the people that tend to be in those skirmish lines when they're called up, listen, they could in LA, they could use more training, right? Like everybody could always, and because LAPD and LA Sheriff's Department are, have gone through a lot the last decade or so and are down some bodies in some ways. I think that could be maybe prioritized a little bit more because we seem to kind of show up and act like it's our first time every time, right? And what that means from a psychological point of view, or at least an operational point of view, is that it could be, right? Like depending on who got called that day, depending on who's responding, that's what I mean by little Joe Schmuckatelli, right? It could be his first time really. And so there's an element of watching this that I feel that if if maybe the community would talk about it a bit more openly, like hopefully we are now, that we could understand like it does tend to be all of the civilians first time, the citizens first time, and that it is sort of a chaotic situation. And there's only one exception I'd take with you calling it a sort of like a war zone, right? And the difference is that all of our law enforcement, and hopefully not very many of our citizens, are trained to kill, right? So when that flip switches, that switch flips, and Marines or warfighters go into, find, close, engage, and destroy, right? That's
And
qualitatively
sorry,
different.
could you repeat that again? Because
Yeah,
that was
it's
scary.
find, close, engage, and destroy. So find the enemy, close with them, engage with maximum effective force, and destroy. That's what our Marines do when they're in a combat zone and they're cleared for war, right? No one's cleared for any of that in downtown LA. In fact, there are layers and layers and layers upon layers, making sure that nobody even uses an actual lethal weapon.
Okay.
So
That's
I think it's just the pressure, though, that, I mean, listen, the hardest part about being an officer or deputy in that situation is that like 70% of our law enforcement in LA are non-white, right? And so often they're from the community, they have sympathies, and they're looking at people that look just like them, and they've got a job to do, and their buddy gets like hit in the head with something, and it's just chaos, right? And
Well, it sounds like a recipe for disaster. It seems like the absolute opposite way of if we're trying to like build our community and keep our economy stable. And
it is certainly, I would certainly not call it productive, right? Like, I think there are more productive ways to have this conversation. But if you really think through the last couple of decades of American public life, right, what I saw in the war zones was actually like poor people from Afghanistan and Iraq coming face to face with like Marines and soldiers from Compton and Appalachia and places like that. Neither of these people have any issue with one another,
right.
right? It's the powers that be. And when we saw the George Floyd stuff, right, it was folks from Compton and other black neighborhoods and their supporters coming together against a bunch of largely brown and black police officers, right? So we have these big, huge issues, and what happens, and the stage becomes a recipe for harming
Each other.
the most vulnerable and
Yeah.
each other, which of course just creates a spectacle and doesn't really accomplish all that much. So it's hard to, when people are upset and they're passionate, it's hard to keep people, in a position where they can communicate. But I've said a number of times that like the BLM stuff was amazing for having a community with a clear grievance and moral injury in their experience of being American. But what ends up happening is because there's no real attention or action, it gets pushed to a protest against other folks who are probably going to be morally injured by having to make choices. Do I arrest this person that I agree with or that looks just like me? How do I, this isn't what I signed up for. I signed up to get speeding tickets and catch people that are doing drugs and selling them to, stuff that's really clear, right? None of this is black and white for the people on the front lines, especially.
Well, and it sounds like too, I've heard this not just from you, but from a friend of mine who was in the DEA, that like what she thought she was signing up for wasn't what she actually ended up signing up for, and wasn't going after the kind of people. Can you talk about what it means for ICE and for the people that they're going after versus who they said they were going after?
Yeah. Well, I don't have any anymore. I still have a top secret clearance, but I don't have any specific read on to like what operations ICE is doing, right? But first and foremost, just the hardest thing about me with ICE is that like most other federal agencies, including the FBI, ATF, these folks are just like mostly veterans and like regular old police like anywhere else, right? And of course they're definitely a target and they're a lightning rod, and that part for them is just hard, right? But what they usually do is they work warrants, right? Which means they're finding some place where they think there's a more significant illegal or criminal operation going on than, say, just like a handful of people standing at a bus stop. But the new policy, and former Director Holman, right, has made clear, like, if you are there while they're effecting a warrant and an arrest, you're going to get picked up. And that's a lot of where some of the stuff is contentious, right? Because people in LA, I think, are relatively clear. They're not thrilled with the idea that if you just walk in the street, you can get grabbed, and if you just happen to be in the wrong place where there's a warrant being effectuated, then that's really surprising to people. And I got to be honest, I doubt sincerely that most of the folks that work for ICE, necessarily want all that collateral either. I mean, they're professional investigators and they're trying to get big cases, right, where they get like a trafficking ring, or they get, they're not looking for, Joey Bag of Donuts that, just overstayed his visa, right? They're looking for people that are really involved in stuff that's detrimental to our community, and because they're just like us, right? I mean, they're not they're not making decisions at that political level.
Well, and that's, the car wash by my place got raided, as did the guy selling like the not ice cream, but like the frozen fruit type things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that didn't make anyone feel safer. And people were putting up, banners and things
Yeah.
saying, "Bring back our friends," and so if ultimately we're all seeing that, and when I say we're all, I mean a lot of people who are watching, like, are seeing that this isn't making anyone safer,
Sure.
and it's demoralizing a lot of the people who are called to do this work.
Yeah.
Uh, where, like, how do we fix this? Like,
Sure. Sure.
because from a psychological perspective, a lot of people are like, "F it, I'm checking out," like in many ways, and that is not that's not going to help.
Well, like a lot of things, psychological, right? Like at the peak of disagreement, sotto voce in conflict is not usually the best problem solving approach, right? And I think we can all agree that both our mass media and some of the tenor of our politics mean that we're solving these things, by which I mean not solving them, yelling, screaming loudly in the street, right? That's not helpful for anybody, right? We're not going to solve anything that way, right? But I think what I think we could do is look at like what cooperation with federal authorities means, right? Like we have policies going back to the 80s in LA, as at least Chief McDonald has mentioned on numerous occasions, that those policies are set, right? Our police aren't looking at people for those violations. They're not engaged, and they can't assist in those kinds of enforcement. That's actually a standing law that's been on the books for like 40, 50 years. Maybe it's time to take a look at it, like as a community, not as like police telling us what they need to do, right? But as a community that maybe needs to take a more active role in deciding what is and what isn't safe. Okay, so because LA doesn't cooperate at all and is a sanctuary city and basically a sanctuary county, you have to contrast those operations with what happened in Riverside. Like a few days after this all wrapped up here in LA, it was a huge illegal marijuana grow on federal ground. So that's definitely ICE and those guys. It was a few hundred people. It was like 14 minors. And unfortunately, the human trafficking business, right, that is trafficking in persons for either work exploitation, sexual exploitation, or other, is surpassed drugs as the most profitable business for all of these cartels and all of these organizations that send those people, charge them $20,000 to get them across the border, take their passport if they have one, and they are stuck and they are working on that marijuana grow illegally, but they're 14. They don't, so the narratives in this have to be just a little bit more unique, right? We hear about the ones that have been here for 20 years and just didn't get around to citizenship or whatever, and their kids are here alone now. But I don't think we're hearing enough about I think the economy of LA would suffer to the tune of over $150 billion if illegals were somehow just to vanish one day, like your SNAP. But the problem is a lot of that is not legal wage. It's below minimum wage. A lot of it is exploitative. A lot of it is,
So if the money that was being invested in DHS, in ICE, was instead invested in normalizing people who are here undocumented, and making that system more efficient, would that be, especially given that there are people here who are almost what you're describing as not indentured servitude, but almost very similar to that, would that be a better investment? Like, let's talk about the economy of this and what's really realistic.
Well, I think it's probably a double-edged sword, right? I mean, I think no matter what our politics are, we have to sort of agree that the problem of the border and securing our border is just not on par with places like Europe and other sort of first world economies. And we just don't have the first foggiest idea who's coming or going most of the time. It's not an option, right? Like we can't do any of the stuff that ICE or the courts or even these NGOs that want to help immigrants do unless we have some level of awareness and something that works. And it doesn't, right? It doesn't at all. I mean, we can shut the border down and we can sort of open it up. And those are like our only two options, right?
I was like, hopefully we're not shutting it down, because I do want to ask you, once you finish this thought, about the militarized zone that they're creating.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's always going to be, right? There's always going to be the segment that tries to take advantage of our legal system and our borders, and Mexico's as well, right? Their cartels are serious players. And it is a multi-billion dollar global industry to traffic people. Lots and lots of folks die. Lots of folks are sexually exploited. So I mean, that would be where I would think about cooperation with law enforcement, right? If we don't want to cooperate with them on like grabbing people off the street, then maybe what we do is learn how to cooperate with them rescuing children and women that are trafficked somehow. You know what I mean? Not to say that I have an immediate answer off the top of my head, but we can all kind of imagine for the police and for the victims, that would certainly feel a lot better, you know what I mean, than the fact that everybody runs when ICE shows up,
Well,
right?
and I think we can all get behind that, but it does feel like there is some sort of pressure or collusion from a certain tier that may either want to look the other way, being paid to look the other way, because if this has been an ongoing issue that everybody is aware of.
So I kind of hate to say this way, but I mean, we get a very black and white kind of view of these issues a lot these days. Social media doesn't give us the whole story; it gives us 30-second soundbite, right? So when the mayor and everyone go on TV and say, "Yay, we've got 3,000 less homeless people than we did last year," well, yeah, but that's because 2,500 died last year. Like, there's always two sides to this. Where we're failing isn't always a good thing. Similarly, I take a pretty significant exception to the idea that that we're profiting, right? And every time we talk about the hit to the California economy, what we're saying is that, oh, we'll profit less if we don't exploit people for illegal and free labor. I mean, that's a huge part of the trafficking argument. And so I think, there's just no question about it. It's probably not going to be like Home Depot corporate, but if Home Depot is letting a bunch of guys work illegally, does that seem like a big deal? No, I mean, I don't care. Like, pay people to do work, you know what I mean? And we certainly have the need for the work. We've got the room. But I think that what's happened is this has become very exploitative. And I think that the political views are going the exact opposite direction, right? The left is looking at that poor, refugee child that just wants a safe place that we want to give them, right? And some people on the right in particular, but even national security oriented folks that aren't always necessarily right or left, they're saying, well, but a terrorist could sneak in this way, or fentanyl killed over 100,000 people last year and it comes from Mexico. So it's a very nuanced issue that I think we're basically stuck at the like really floaty wing level of swimming and barely staying afloat on, rather than actually making some compromise and some progress with each other on.
Well, and I think you hit on this a bit, but it's the soundbite nature of everything, not just our social media, but it almost seems like the way we do policy, the way we interact is very soundbitey as
Very
well.
reactive. Yeah, I actually, there was a moment I literally lived. It's actually a few blocks away from here. I'm back downtown LA for the day, and my apartment was right across from the Broad, or right next to the Broad, right across from Mocha. And the first sort of protest, spontaneous, that was a lot of black folk, but not exclusively, and it wasn't probably BLM yet, because I don't think there was a BLM yet, was right in front of my building. And I walked out in front of it, and it was totally peaceful. And I walked up to this 6'5" guy, and I'm like, "Hey man, what's going on?" I didn't tell him I was working with the sheriff's department. I was just wanting to know. Peaceful protest, right? Cool, right? That's where it starts. And I walk around the corner, and I swear to God, there is a literal production crew setting up in front of a skirmish line of LAPD guys with a helmet on, but no riot gear, because of they're trying to figure out the optics. They managed to find, like, I think 9 out of the 10 cops were lily white. That's just not the department at all. But they managed to, at random, take a bunch of white police. And to their credit, the protesters and the people that are trying to make good media to influence people were capturing it. And they were like making a big fuss right in front of these folks, but really like nothing else was going on, right? So what we see, you know what I mean, and what we know about what's going on, I think, is hard right now. You know what I mean? Everybody's wanting to make their point, and they do it with splashy stuff. The hard work of compromising and giving up things we want and getting to understand our neighbor better and their problems and how to help them, like, yeah, no, we're not very good.
No one wants to do. No one wants to
do that right now at all.
So you've now left law enforcement largely, and you're working strictly as a clinical psychologist.
For the moment, yeah, it's pretty crazy. After almost 20 years, I'm just a doctor.
Just not just a doctor.
Yeah.
Can you talk, because I want to end on hope. I tell everybody, I promise we're going to end on hope. So now you're working strictly in psychology. A lot of people are having a really hard time because we're not trained for moments like these.
Sure.
How do we go from that kind of like fight, flight, freeze, or fawn And I think people know how to do it once. What I'm seeing is we're having a hard time realizing that we're going to have to do it every day.
This appears to be the new normal.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one thing I can recommend strongly, good friend of mine, Dr. Anna Lemke, wrote a book called Dopamine Nation, and it's actually a workbook too. And she's been on Rogan and all that stuff. She runs addiction medicine at Stanford. It's about taking dopamine fasts. And that means every once in a while, we might want to turn that phone or that social media off for a week or two and let our brain, which is constantly getting that hit, like you said, of dopamine, fight, flight, freeze, of like we get addicted to that, right? And so the first thing is we have to realize that like our poor little brains were, basically probably designed to be picking up, berries and our kids in the jungle somewhere with like 30 of our closest family and friends, not knowing exactly what's happening with like Elon and Trump in the White House at 3:00 in the afternoon every single day, right? Right. And so it really is, we got to watch ourselves for wanting that dopamine hit. And then, of course, I think it makes sense to ask ourselves, my bubble, am I only getting outragey stuff? Am I only getting the stuff that makes me angry? Because that's how social media profits. So we would just take that layer off for a second, right? Whether it's terrorists, whether it's hate speech, and frankly, even whether it's maybe sometimes law enforcement that are using a little bit of fear to manage crowds and individuals, we have to ask ourselves, am I really in danger? Or have I just been worked up into, this is like basically if someone's got a panic disorder problem, the first thing we do is check your 5s, 10s, and 25s. That's military for it. Look around you. Are you safe? And if you're safe, then you have to say, ooh, maybe I should sort of stand down. Maybe yellow alert's okay, but red alert doesn't make a lot of sense. Because if you really think about it, this is a great question, because when all folks are out yelling in the street, right, they're all in fight, flight, or freeze mode, which means there's only those 3 options, right? You're going to fight, you're going to run away, or you're going to freeze. And that's the same for every human being in that situation. You know what I mean? Even the police, their training hopefully makes them not run away. And when they fight, hopefully they fight in a de-escalatory way. You know what I mean? But like we really are sort of working these things out in the worst possible place with the least human options of our brains and our hearts. But the other thing is, like, these things have always happened and they're always going to happen. And what's different is, kind of being like plugged into a constant drip of them. Ask yourself, if you're the audience, well, I don't care which side of any of this you're on, are you titrating the dose of how much of this you get, or are you trained by your phone or trained by your feed, right? Like we've always all had that experience, right? Where you set up a really important meeting and you go to the boss's office and you're sitting there, right? And the phone rings and what do? Like just automatic, they pick it up. It's like, I just need 30 minutes of your time and I scheduled this. Why are you, answering a crank call from, but we do it all the time, right? Yeah. And so part of, I think, fight, flight, or freeze, what's underneath that for a lot of people is hopeless and helpless. Okay. Here's the thing. We do live in America. We're not hopeless. We're not helpless. However you look at this, you know what I mean? We're probably going to get through it, and change is always like the least thing we like. We'd rather things stay the same and bad than that they change, right? But I suspect most people do want some change. So we have to kind of manage our own emotions in that regard, and maybe ask ourselves let's be honest, since Trump went down his golden staircase, right? He's made an empire out of people's inability to turn him off.
Absolutely. So I wish I had asked everyone to grab a pen and a notebook to start taking notes during this show. So I'm just going to have everyone, you're just going to have to rewatch, because this was enlightening, insightful, helpful. I am going to start titrating my dose of dopamine, and I'm going to start.
Dopamine Nation. I love Anna. It's great stuff. It applies to all of us. And oh, by the way, that smile on your face, which is, we had a conversation. Right? Like we don't agree on everything. We know each other well enough to know about that. But like without the conversation, no one's we could just be throwing food at each other in a restaurant or something like that, but that probably wouldn't help.
Maybe a food fight is how we're going to have to resolve this. Maybe people just need to get it all out. I don't know. Maybe I could actually see it devolving into that.
And it does sometimes, but I think we're all going to be okay. I just think we've been on a roller coaster, and it, like, you're right to say fight, flight, or freeze. It just hasn't turned off since COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
Before,
So what you're feeling is real, folks, but we're going to check our 5s and our 10s. What are we checking?
5, 10s, and 25s. Look to see if if there's anything at 5 meters, 10 meters, or 25 meters that can actually hurt you. If it's your
Okay.
TV, it has an off button.
Got it. Can't hurt me. Can't be hurt by the TV if I can turn it off. Guys, this is wisdom from Dr. Schumacher here from Dr. Matt. Thank you for joining Punching Up. You are, of course, welcome back anytime.
Would love to.
Yeah, and in the meantime, where can people find you if they want to hear more from you?
They can email you.
Perfect.
I don't have anything especially good right now to give folks, but I'll probably have something in the next 2 or 3 months.
Awesome. We'll be on the lookout for it. Thank you so much again for joining, and I'll talk to you soon.
Appreciate you. Great to see you.
Great to see you.